Hello, everyone, and possibly even every more than one. Welcome to the Integral Stage, the so-called first draft of the liminal web, where we map the emerging topology of transformational, developmental, and regenerative thinking through dialogue and curiosity. This is an episode of our subseries called My Kind of Country, in which we explore the lived experience of being part of a national intersubjectivity. What is the role of countries in an emerging and rapidly shifting planetary circumstance? Where does the nation spirit reside in the hearts of complex and developmental thinkers, and how is that unfolded over the course of their lives? And maybe most importantly, what does it take to create, sustain, honor, heal, restore, and or upgrade the sacred potency of a shared civic spirit? I'm Layman Pascal, probably, and joining me today is philosopher, musician, occult adjacent, trans-Hegelian, and OG of Black Metamodernism, Germane Marvel. Hey man, good to see you.
How you doing? Thank you for such a illustrious introduction. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's very snowy and very cold here, which is fun because shoveling snow is a great opportunity to listen to the audiobooks I need to get caught up on.
Nice.
Okay, let's start like at ground zero. How old were you when you first thought, "Oh, am I British? Is that a thing?"
I knew the first question was going to be a doozy. uh, Quite young,
Mhm.
under five, definitely. Do you remember when Princess Diana died? What year that was?
I don't remember the year. It was definitely in the 90s, like I want to say
Yeah,
mid 90s.
yeah, yeah. So around that time, I already knew. Yeah, from the reaction of everyone around me. Yeah, and I was born in '87. Okay, so anyone wants to know.
Did you feel anything about Diana's death?
At first, I was confused because I am able to read the emotions of a room at times. So I was confused at why people were having this response. And my mum contextualized it because she had actually met Princess Diana. So and she met her and she didn't bow, and Princess Diana stopped and talked to her and had a conversation. And that was when she first arrived in England. So that was that this person who had been nice to my mum had now passed, and someone who he liked in the royal family had passed. Which
I actually, yeah, side note on this, my friend and I rented a video and we went to his house to watch it. Um, and we couldn't because his mother and his mother's sister were watching the whole funeral a second time on the one television that they had. And I like it blew my mind. They were rewatching Diana's funeral already.
that's not quite. We didn't show them as much diligence to the events as they did, but
Yeah.
that's quite commendable.
Um, what makes you the most proud and least proud of the country that you grew up in?
The least proud is far easier. The most proud. The most proud of the communities I'm part of, and the land being a hub for those communities and to grow to the extent that it is a hub for those communities to grow. Which leads us to the least proud, which is the treatment of some of my communities or some members of my communities by this country, and perhaps where it looks like we're going to go next general election. I'm not very proud of that.
Well, you mentioned land, and then I realize it's something I haven't asked people enough about in this series. What's your relationship to the actual landscape, to the geology, to the ecology, right? From my point of view, as like a Canadian, which is like vaguely, it's adjacent to the British sphere, it's a land of Celtic enchantment. And there's a lot of sacred sites, a lot of interesting things. How did you grow up feeling about just the geological and ecological infrastructure of the UK?
Yeah, I was born in London, so I grew up with the grey, quite flat. Yeah, a lot of sacred sites, which are now other sacred sites. which you won't know unless you look into the history of certain sites. I think St Paul's Cathedral is one, I think. But then I moved to the countryside. I moved to a village, a big village called in a little city outside of a little city. The big village is Brockworth, where the cheese roll happens, and the little city is Gloucester, which has its own history, its own sacred sites. Yeah, so I got to see both ends. It's a beautiful country. It's a very beautiful country. It's best to be able to make friends with the grey because even when you leave the city for the green, you still got the grey because of the weather. So yeah.
Um, do you vote? Are you a guy who tracks British politics?
I predicted since Brexit, since the election before Brexit, I've predicted the result of every general election. Um, I did think Reform were going to be doing better this year, this time around. I didn't think we are going to get in, but I did think they're going to do better. And the same with the American elections. In terms of voting, I have voted in the past for my local elections once or twice. That was when I was back in Brockworth, mainly for my mum's sake to help her try and get in the candidates that she would like or to keep out the Conservatives as she wanted. Didn't work, number one. And apart from that, I don't actually vote because yeah, well, we can get into that.
So you guys have a Labour government now after a series of increasingly incompetent and clownish conservatives who were in charge for a long time. Is there any? Do you detect any change in the spirit of the people? Are you like, oh, this is a new day, something's going to happen, or is it more of the same old shit and it's just going to get chewed up into the system?
I have to say the only real enduring energetic sense of optimism I get from British voters are from those looking forward to reform getting into power. I don't sense anyone voting for Keir Starmer was particularly enthusiastic about voting for Starmer, perhaps apart from Labour voters who weren't down with Jeremy Corbyn and really don't like Darren Abbott and you know um, like from my perspective, our whole axis of politics has kind of shifted to the right quite a bit, and so now our left-leaning party is actually kind of left-center party, and a lot of their policies resemble. Yeah, they just it's a very strange time. Um, so yeah, there's not really much optimism, unfortunately, for the changes. Yeah, in fact, there's quite the opposite. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about that because one way to think about shared spirit is, do we have energy? Do we have optimism? Are we excited about something? And yet, it's always seemed to me that being performatively cynical is part of the heart of being British in a lot of ways. Is it, do the British people express themselves in optimism, or should we be looking for the right kind of pessimism?
I think both. I think the right kind of pessimism is a good thing to look out for. And that's why I say, that's there's not the unbridled optimism around Labour. There's a hope that they can do something good. But there's a kind of there's also an expectation of well, they're probably just going to be the same old and be a bit more like Tony Blair, but not as good as responding to the right. Um, yeah, there is optimism. There is. We can be optimistic. Shall I say? British people can be optimistic. It's just uh, yeah.
So, what do you think? Is national spirit a real thing, or is it just a convenient metaphor?
Uh, Both, I think. Um, it is a real thing. However, I would question: is the thing it points to real, or is it just pointing to a way for us to a group of people who are experiencing similar environments to connect? Um, yeah, yeah. Because like when I look at like nationalism and national identity from a meta-modern perspective, uh, and how the individual, I personally look at meta-modern individualism as the idea that the individual can't be divided from their environment. And in fact, that's one of the only ways that the individual can't be divided is from their environment. And so when we look at that, we can see that nationalism is actually quite a existential, it taps into quite an existential thing, and that's kind of the power of it. And it also gives us a shared experience with all the other people around us. And yeah. Um, so yeah, I think I probably answered both right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of people who would be interested in metamodernism or any other kind of complex, let's move our thinking and our civilization forward kind of mood, they tend to be planetary in their sensibilities. They tend to relate to the human or even the more than human and not just their local ethnocentric thing. But is there a way in which that loses the universal that's embedded in the particular? Like, can we really be planetary universal beings, or can we only do that through the identity in which we grew up, in which we are embedded?
Mm. I think we can be universal. I think it takes us accepting that we can pretty much only see through the lens of who we are, which includes our identity. And then by doing that, we can be better equipped to take on and understand the identity and the interiority of others. And then by being able to take on the identity and interiority of others and understanding our own identities in relation with that, then we can have like a kind of a planetary sense of being. Um, yeah, I think perhaps a segue. I think there is a tendency to shun identity. And I use the analogy of a wind and a boat and the sail, in that it's like the wind is coming, identity is coming, and so I adjust the sail to negate the identity, the wind, but the wind is still there. I've done an action in order for me not to. So yeah, and like the idea of the individual only being separated by being indivisible from the environment. Also, identity, also a lot of our identity, and this is kind of the issue in these times. A lot of our identity, we're realizing, comes from the environment. It's kind of foisted upon us, whether it's true or not, whether it's fact or fiction. It might be myth, and it's acknowledging this and acknowledging all the myths that are told about us, and acknowledging the myth that we tell ourselves, and it is a myth, but it's the one that we tell ourselves, and how to mesh this. Yeah, I think that's quite important. So yeah, a bit of a segue, but yeah, I hope that answers.
um, when you look back, so here's something the Americans do a lot, right? They look back and they go, when was America great, and how can we restore that? And the center left sort of imagines maybe it was the '60s, and the right imagines it was the '50s. When you look back in the UK, are there moments where you think, oh, that moment kind of glows for me? I think maybe that was like a high point of British culture, or we were getting it together. When was it at its best?
And I know, that's Jamaican for saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. I think okay. I think that I think that the idea of best, it's like asking who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time when it comes to rappers. It's like, okay, for me, actually, it's who's the greatest of a time.
Hmm.
It's like, to be the greatest of all time when time is infinite doesn't make sense. I've always had this trouble from when I was young. Best friend. Are you my best friend? Well, if I say you're my best friend, that means they're gonna not be happy. And I also, yeah. So I think there are many periods. If I'm going to be forced, if I'm going to be forced, I'm probably going to say something very old, which is to do with the land's formation and not to do with, um, uh, handle some point in the future. And if I'm going to be very loose, I'll probably say the present is the best. That kind of sage, like, yeah. I don't think we've got there yet. I think we can. I think we're able to, like America, we're able to get to that place. I think it has. I think nostalgia kind of, yeah, it can make us think that the past was great. A bit like Andrew Tate justifying his father's
Hmm.
mistreatment of him, then leading to the formulation of, well, that treatment was good and that's what is good for people and loves them, so I'm going to treat myself that way, and then I'm going to treat other people the same way. And then yeah, I think that nostalgia can be quite dangerous. We have to be honest with ourselves about the good stuff that has happened in our past and also the bad stuff. Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
tricky balance. You know, a lot of people, a lot of this new right-wing surge that's going on around the world expresses itself as a challenge to the self-critique of nations. Right? A lot of them are saying, look, if we spend too much time thinking about what we've done wrong, we lose touch with the mythic potency of our slightly made up story about how we're awesome. And if we don't have that story, if we don't really feel it, then how can we continue to do good things? How do you think about balancing, self-critique and mythological self-empowerment as a people?
Uh, Something that I have to do as an artist. I'm very self-critical. I can always think of a lot of things I've done wrong after a show, and the audience can come and tell me, you're great as one. And I think it's kind of because the right in this case is not wrong, to the point where uh, personally, I don't tolerate me talking badly about myself, self-deprecation. I don't like it. I don't think I should do it. No, I don't. I think I must not do it. I think I must do better. I think I must talk to myself in a nice way. And in the same way, I don't accept that from anybody else. That's. However, I can still acknowledge, to put it in Christian terms, I can still acknowledge that I have sinned in the past and that I'm a sinner, and I probably will sin again, and hopefully not in the same way as I've sinned before. But that is a thing, and in looking at that and holding that I have sinned, then I can ask for forgiveness for my sins and forgive myself for my sins and learn from my sins and learn the lessons. If I just kind of completely ignore what I've done and ignore my sins, and I can't learn from what I've done, and then I can't do better in the future. And I feel like that's what is lost, is the sense of being able to do better in the future every day, by learning from what we've done. And it's the term from Africa, sorry, I can't remember which tradition it comes from, but a term from Africa comes to mind, which is a sankofa, which is means it's not taboo to look backwards, and it's symbolized by a bird with its feet pointing in one direction and then its head pointing in the other. Yeah.
Okay, here's a multiple choice question in terms of what's holding the British spirit back from its next best step? Is it A, um, the failure to properly address and heal things it's done wrong in the past? Is it B, just a lack of institutions that adequately cultivate civic spirit in people? Or C, the presence of parasitic entities who profit from the destruction of the social fabric?
I feel like that's interrelated. The destruction of the social fabric. Um, Sorry, go through them again. A, B, and C. Sorry.
So, like healing the past,
Yeah.
things the country's done wrong, um, simply the absence of appropriate habits that cultivate
Yeah.
civic spirit, or some people are getting paid based on the destruction of the shared spirit.
All are true, and it's really interesting in the way that those who might profit from civil division also would profit from there not being those institutions, and would profit from not healing from the past, because actually they may have profited from things in the past, which so I think it is a mixture of all of those, but it's also the way that we're educated, in a way, in that we're educated to be workers and not educated to be humans, and so we don't have emotional education, and so yeah, we're not able to process certain feelings. It's harder to process certain feelings. It's the capacity to do as such hasn't been valued until very recently. Yeah, I guess that comes to the institutions. Yeah, so all of the above. D.
Okay. uh, I know you're a guy who's thought about the global north and the global south kind of situation that's going on this planet. It's all too easy for us to think in terms of east-west integration to create globalization. We often leave the South out of that equation. What do you think it takes for Britain in the next generation, say, to be a much better integrator of the global South?
That's a good question. We're quite a small country, you know. We're quite a small country. Uh, what's big about us is our financial institutions, which is kind of a separate country if you look into it. Uh, the city of London, that being, it's kind of a separate country in England, which we can skip around. It's realizing we already have connections, we already have dynamics with other groups, and they haven't always been great, and yet the connections still remain. And uh, in a word, allow the Commonwealth to be a Commonwealth and not an Orwellian term of doublespeak where wealth isn't common. Um, yeah, not very popular at all in our kind of crony capitalist worlds where government lobbying has a lot more control. Um, and we're not as cooperative in the way we think things can be done. We think being cooperative will lead to being taken advantage of. Yeah. Uh,
I interviewed Jonathan Rowson, the publisher of Perspectiva, and he said that he feels more like a Scot and more like a Londoner and not really like a Brit or an Englishman. And as somebody from London who lived in the countryside and comes back to London, um, do you feel more British or more Londoner?
um, so, firstly, being British and being English are two different things. A lot of people who say they're British will say they're British and not English because of the sense of patriotism that has come from England, which has been kind of a destructive,
Mm.
expansionist kind of. I'd say so. I would say I am British. I'm definitely a Londoner, and my time in the countryside has shown me what some of the beauty about what it is to be English. And it's also given me a better grasp of the situation on the ground. Um, yeah. Um, yeah.
And how would you say London and like the London ethos is perceived by people in the countryside?
Everything's happening in London. There's a lot going on. Um, it can take away some of, uh, or at least it seems like everything's happening in London, and so that the other areas don't get enough attention, enough due for for parts for what they do for the country, what they contribute to the country. Yeah, and then there's the other side of things of London's where all of the others are, and it's almost a country to itself. It thinks completely differently from the rest of the country. It's not all quite true, there's edges to it. Uh, but yeah, it's a lot harder to be racist in London. Yeah. I mean, like it's harder for someone who's intolerant of other people to live a life that they can tolerate in London. Um,
Is uh, is English patriotism sabotaging British patriotism?
Only to the extent that it seeks to dominate. Yeah, yeah. Only to the extent it seeks to dominate all the others, and it doesn't, doesn't realize a lot of the negatives that have been done to the Scots and the Welsh and the Irish. Yeah. Once those can be taken in, I feel like the humility added, which is needed for any kind of patriotism, a bit of humility. Yeah, yeah. The dominance and the supremacy, I feel like that's where things can get edgy if there are historical grievances. If there are no historical grievances and it's just a big, it's kind of a joke, then the oh, Arsenal's better than Spurs, you know, then that's kind of that can be a bit more lighthearted.
What would it take for the English spirit to get that humility and to like fit in better with the Scottish spirit, the Irish spirit, and the Welsh spirit?
What would it take? I guess to understand that England is a nation of immigrants. Anglo-Saxon is what English people we tend to call ourselves. The Anglos were from France. Saxons were from France. They also were both have Viking in them. The Romans came over here, and before that there were people like Cheddarman who were very swarthy, who clearly have descended from Africa. So England is a composite nation, and becoming the empire meant it became it just increased all of that. So yeah, yeah, I think that would help. Yeah.
So Canada and to some degree the United States has this problem where there's these different archaeological layers of people here that don't uh, have a shared spirit of history necessarily, right? So I'm in this town, and it was mostly different kinds of Europeans, Italians and Finns were here, and now most of the people coming into the town are East Indian, but also there's the indigenous people, and then there were the indigenous people before those indigenous people, and we don't share a common sense of history, and so it seems to me difficult to get a common sense of a shared future. And it's very tricky to try to imagine that. Like the Europeans in North America don't feel like they necessarily are the people of the place in the same way that the indigenous are, and the indigenous also don't feel that they are. And so it's very tricky for us to start going, as North Americans, this is our common deep history. We are many kinds of people who've been here in various ways for 10, 20, 30,000 years. What's your sense of the presence of the archaic history of the British Isles? Like when we look at a group, say the English patriotic spirit or whatever that is, does it seem like they're disconnected from the ancient history? Or, is that something that different cultural pools in Britain could come together around? The sense that the people of this place go way back.
Mm, I think it will be the same difficulty you have in Canada and America. Um, yeah, because when you actually look at it, the British people are people from several separate groups. I think, um, yeah, I think there needs to be this acceptance that we all have different historical narratives and we all carry with us different myths, and we all project different myths on each other, and we can never really quite understand each other. But we can do our best, and what we can also kind of look to is like trying to yeah, because it's really interesting because the mythology and narrative has been talked about a lot in metamodernism, and I'm sure in integral theory too, and about how we have to look at the way we talk about ourselves and then stories we tell about ourselves. But I'm just the focus from your questioning, it just seems to me that the focus needs to be less on either the past or the future, and yeah, and a sense of a present which is grounded by both. Yeah, so abstract. I don't know if that helps anybody.
When I asked about the English spirit, one of the things you said was if there was more humility there, then the rivalry with the other cultural fields in the UK could be more lighthearted, like just having rival football teams. But isn't there a lot of violence among the fans of football teams, both when they win and when they lose? Like, is there a problem with that layer of with that cultural operating system of just having that team mentality, or is there an innocuous, a kind of benign way to hold all of that?
Yeah, as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, actually, Tottenham Hotspur and Arsenal have a deep historical grievance with a lot of violence in there. The idea of cooperative competition of sparring. I used to box and do martial arts, and whenever you spar, you start spar people you spend a lot of time with. So you're not really actually trying to hurt them, but you are trying to get better. You are trying to hit them, and you do it with a sense of respect. Now, the what I feel actually when I think about it is the vast majority of relations between English and British and it is actually done with that humility in that respect of the vast amount of banter, as they call it, between people from rival teams. It's done with a bit of respect. Yeah, I guess this is one of the things that the that Britain can take on from the global South, and it is that that both and thinking. It's the person to person relationship rather than a person to object relationship. Yeah.
I'm a big Nietzsche guy, and Nietzsche famously never felt like a German. He was very critical of the Germans. He said he was a good European. Now, the UK is in a weird position. It's off on an island by itself. Famously had this Brexit vote a few years ago. Um, to what degree do you feel like you're a European or not?
Yeah, I write about this in Black Metamodernism in that I actually put it in terms of black and white. I am both black and white culturally in some sense because I've grown up in a culture which is predominantly European, predominantly Caucasian, not just European, but also predominantly Caucasian. And so yeah, I'm 100% European. I'd go further than that. Eurasian, Afro-Eurasian, that kind of obscures the Caribbean and the Americas, where my lineage also comes from. Uh, but yeah, I mean, my great grandma was Indian, is what I've always been told. I've never ascertained whether that's which Indian that was, the West Indian, the original peoples of Caribbean, the Tainos, or um, yeah, yeah. The story of human migration is fascinating. The story of human resilience beyond ice ages is fascinating. The way that we were covered the earth for thousands of years, and then the ice age came and kind of killed off a lot of us, and then we still had the tenacity to come back from that and to be who we are today. Um, the third rock from the sun, it's basically a terrestrial spaceship orbiting a massive fire. Yeah, it just when it just gets contextualized. Yeah, sure, I'm a Londoner. Yeah, sure, I prefer Southeast. Yeah, sure, I was born in Southwest, but I now prefer Southeast because that's where my communities are and the rents are cheaper. Do you know what I mean? Sure, you could say south of the river is definitely where I'm from. But I'm still a Londoner at that, and then I'm still English because I was born in England, and then I'm still British, and then yeah, it's nested. It's nested, and none of the nesting takes away any of the other stuff. It just adds to it. Yeah.
So it seems to me that as we go forward on this planet, there's a lot of anticipated disruptions. There's already a lot of migrants for various political and ecological reasons. So the old human strategy for becoming really indigenous, becoming the people of a place, was to just live there for many generations and slowly adapt to its nuances. We don't really have that luxury anymore. We have to do that adaptation a lot faster. As a guy who's moved around, what have you noticed is a successful strategy for starting to really feel like you are of the place that you're in? How do you become local when you move to a new place?
If I go to my Sainsbury's and don't talk to anyone or any of the staff, and I go and buy all my stuff, and I go and get my takeaway around the corner, and I do, or if I go to Tesco, sorry, or Lidl's or any other supplier, then I am I really being local? Am I really known as local? Do you know what I mean? You're only local by the context of the interactions you have with people. There's a lady I call the Queen of Deptford because how regal she is and the way she dresses, but also the way she interacts with other people and the way other people interact with her. And they discuss the issues that they might have in the area. And um, uh, yeah, so it's really contextual. It's really about the interactions you have with people. A local hermit is only a local hermit because the locals know about the local hermit. um, yeah, but that saying as well, then the interaction can go beyond just the humans around you. If you are the local hermit, you're also having a relationship with your environment. You're obviously getting resources from somewhere. So, um, yeah, it's really contextual, really relational, and it's about the interactions, I believe. Um, yeah, because anything else I can answer, getting to know the history, getting to know the best spots, getting to know information. That's just us interacting with our environment in different ways.
As a Southwest, Southeast Londoner, Brit, Euro, Afro Asian, when you look at the scene, the meta modern, the integral, the game B, the whatever scene that's going on in North America, which aspects of it do you think are kind of quintessentially American? You go, oh, that's a very North American way to handle that. Do you see any differences of that kind?
Um, I don't know. At the moment, I haven't really got anything. I haven't got much. I've got a lot of critique for game game B, a lot of critique for integral theory, a lot of critique for spiral dynamics, and a lot of critique for metamodernism. Yeah, and the various flavors. Um, Given where we are in the world, I would like people to sit up. Um, I mean, I feel the difference between English, the way English metamodernists put things together and American metamodernists put things together, I feel it's quite kind of negligible. Even when we then extend it further to, Nordic and Dutch, I feel like it's kind of negligible for the large part until it explores uh, identity. Um, yeah, yeah. I'm avoiding saying things, but until it explores identity, yeah, yeah.
Um, when I talk to people who are like the continental Europeans, they often have this critique, and it's sometimes leveled just at America and sometimes at the whole Anglosphere. And the critique is usually, you guys aren't psychoanalytic enough, you guys aren't Hegelian enough, you're too optimistic, you're too self involved, you're not materialist enough. Do you feel some of that same feeling about North America?
I think that it would be a good thing if you weren't too materialistic or too Hegelian or too. Uh, it's just not the answers. It's not the answers. It's not the answers. We have tried those. Hegel is not this escape from dichotomy. Hegel is a series of dichotomy steps. The only thing that is escape from dichotomy about Hegel is time and necessary. Materialism for me. This is all negligible stuff. Um, yeah, I'm trying to put it in a way. If you want, like, to everyone who's watching, theory of eminism on Facebook, Black Metamodernism, a lot of the answers or are going to be there and clarifications are going to be there, although I don't have all the answers of how is the answer, but a lot of it is there. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to go on a rant, unfortunately. I can feel it coming. When we look at game A, when
Do
we
it.
look at game A, the either or win lose thing that we're trying to escape, what's the way to get out of that? It's both and. Now, why has that not never been followed? And when you look at Black Metamodernism, that's kind of why. The oscillation syndrome it's found in North America, it's found in continental, like it's yeah, it, yeah, yeah. I'm holding back, guys, but it's not there. You need to look somewhere else, unfortunately. And me saying this is probably going to push you away from me, and I'm sorry about that. But yeah,
Down this theory tangent, what would you say is because it seems to me there are ways in which oscillation can be the prelude to some structure that transcends oscillation, and other ways in which oscillation is a road that deviates from that kind of structure. What do you think defines like the useful form of oscillation, the oscillation that is actually a prelude to something beyond it?
accident. um, the intention to go beyond oscillation. If I'm intending to go beyond oscillation and I'm oscillating while I'm doing that, and I'm saying, oh, I'm still oscillating, but I could do this bit, that's different. Oscillating for the sake of oscillating is just I'm just doing this. I'm not, and then I get tired, and so I stagnate in the middle, and that's my taxi, and that's meant to be, it's not actually going beyond. It's remaining within the confines of a pre-organized space, cognitive space. Um, yeah, and if anything, oscillation has always been here. It's not a new thing. It's a thing. It's something that humans have always done. Toggling between perspectives is something that humans have always done in one way, which I can show now with dichotomous dialectics and theory of emanism. But the thing is that we just because just because we're now aware of this thing doesn't mean this thing is new, and it doesn't mean that it's going to solve the issues that there were before. Um, Especially if you like, it just doesn't make sense either from a mental health perspective, the oscillation thing. um yeah, yeah, I could go on for a long time.
What were your favorite British TV shows when you were a kid?
uh God, Queen's Nose was pretty good. It's British is hard because we get so much media from everywhere else. So, we got Neighbours and Homes away over here. Gladiators was pretty funny. Obviously, I watched a bit of the Souls Eastenders and that. Mm, yeah, and then there's obviously things like Desmond's, which was yeah, uh, obviously, I'm black, and so it's nice to see yourself represented in different ways. And I can remember there were two primary series for that. One was What You're Looking At, and the other one was Desmond's. Yeah,
Nice. Yeah, I grew up. My mom watched a lot of British TV for some reason, which we would get on the Canadian National Service. I liked a lot of like BBC 80s classics, like Jeeves and Wooster, and like the old Sherlock Holmes with Jeremy Brett. I liked Blackadder when I was in high school because it seemed like, oh, you pick up some historical information while you're laughing. And then later I was really into Peep Show for a while and Mitchell and Webb and that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. Blackadder is great, and yeah, yeah, and Peep Show as well. Yeah.
Would you fight if Britain was attacked?
By who?
I don't know.
I actually thought about joining the TA at one point, the Territorial Army. Before that, I thought very briefly about joining the army. When I was younger, I also thought about joining the police force, but that quickly evaporated after a couple of interactions. I've always contemplated the fact that I probably will need to fight at some point. I feel like something is, before my lifetime is out, something like that's going to happen. Um, but it would depend on who we're fighting, and it would depend on why, and yeah, yeah, it would depend on the way narratives were being spun. Um,
Do you
I'm not a
think that
pacifist. Sorry.
um, a lot of the countries we wouldn't necessarily want to live in have these patriotic ceremonies where they march their missiles out in front of everyone and they have these really rigid soldiers and they seem to rejoice in that. And it looks somewhat pathological to me. But I think there's also a sense in which pride and civic spirit also require an appreciation for the defensive and aggressive capabilities of the nation. What do you think what is the role of the martial spirit in helping to organize a successful cultural field?
I think it's very important. I think it's very important to cultivate it, shape it, understand it, and link it to emotional intelligence. I think when I'm angry, it's usually because there's something that's not fair, and I can then choose what I want to do and not do about it. So I think, like a lot uh, in this day and age, you need a military. If it's not an actual state, if you don't have a military, it's something else. This sense of being able to protect ourselves, protect our loved ones, and protect our family is very important. Um, as I said, I am a martial artist. I consider it a way of life. Um, However, it's not my whole life, and I like to balance it out with other things which aren't as destructive, which are more creative. And I also like to use my martial arts to help me kind of be exercise and whatnot, self-defense, self-confidence. So yeah, forgive me because I'm never sure if I will answer your questions, but I think martial spirit is very important, but I think it can be perverted, it can be corrupted, and that happens when there's not enough emotional intelligence or that subject.
Nice. What do you imagine that somebody from another country would think is the most British thing about you?
My accent. Yeah, probably the way I talk. Uh, oh, I like a cup of tea. I like a cup of tea.
Okay, the accent reminds me of an interesting thing. From a Canadian perspective, anyway, we watch a lot of British TV shows, and it's always interesting to see the intensely dark-skinned Nubian detective inspector on the case with a perfect British accent. And I think for us, that passes the test. We're like, well, they've got the voice. That's British as far as we can tell. And yet, obviously, there's ethnic tension and immigration issues and stuff going on over there. What 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 does it take for an immigrant to Britain to really feel themselves to be and to be perceived as authentic members of the British spirit?
I don't know. I don't know. What's funny is so before my mum came to this country in the 80s, she already had British spirit because that's what the Commonwealth did. The Commonwealth taught everybody that you are a British citizen. You're part of the Commonwealth, you're a British citizen. You have British values, you have a British spirit. And yeah, it was just kind of like so has always been there. Like for me, it's always been there from before birth almost. So um yeah. In integration as opposed to assimilation, I think is key. It's going a bit beyond the scope of your question, but I think if you just integrate a little bit, taking a few of the customs, taking a few of the cultures, watch a bit of the TV. Let's be fair. If you come over here and you're Indian, then you're already part of the culture because national like it's like one of my favorite dishes is curry. So um, yeah, and some people I know will disagree with me when I say that, but I just think being British, it's not as constricted as we like to think. But that is the difference between being British and being English. Being British is much more expansive.
Yeah. Yeah, my perspective, and it's biased because I grew up in the Commonwealth as well. Not that the Commonwealth means much anymore, but it's impressive, I think, compared to some of the other European colonial empires, that the British were able to export Britishness so dynamically to the point where people growing up in the colonies felt very British. So here's an interesting question for me: is when your mom came to the heartland of the empire, was she satisfied? Was she impressed? Or was actually being in Britain something that undermined her sense of what Britishness was?
My mum always tells me a story. My granddad came first. My mum always tells the story of when she really wanted to know what a pub looked like because she had read about the pubs where all the poets had sat and penned these great works and had these amazing conversations. And so she wanted to know what a pub was like. My granddad was like, I'm not taking you to the pub. Um, Mum insisted. Granddad took her, and she was shocked. So yeah, but I think that's the thing. And and then when I talk about, if I go back to my granddad. My granddad didn't have the best experience here. You know, my mum didn't either. I will tell the story. She once went for an interview, job interview, and she thought she was doing really well. And the guy got distracted for a minute, so she like looked over what he was writing, and it was like intelligent, smart, well dressed, qualified, but black. And so those obviously are going to shake your because that is not really talked about. Yeah, that's not really talked about when Britishness is exported. Obviously, yeah.
So one thing that the British have, I mean, the Canadians have it too, but not that much. But the Americans don't have it, which is this the monarch, this sort of central symbolic figure of the cultural field. Right? And I know I've heard people argue that if Americans had a king, they wouldn't have to keep trying to elect one, and they could focus on electing a good manager of the nation. But that's not totally a successful strategy because Britain elects a lot of bad managers as well. I've had arguments. I've met a lot of British people over the course of my life who would say things like they hate the monarchy, but they love sweet little old Queen Elizabeth. She's a good queen. And just to be contrarian, sometimes I would argue that no, there can be good monarchies, but she was a terrible queen because she presided over the collapse of the empire and a rise of cynicism toward monarchs. And a good monarch would have done the opposite. So, not that any of that means anything, but how do you relate to I guess the figure of Queen Elizabeth and also King Charles III. Do you have any mythic emotions toward them? Do you feel like that's an important role in orchestrating a national spirit? Or is it something that's getting in the way of the national spirit growing and moving forward?
Um, I met I met the Queen Mother, so Queen Elizabeth's mum, at school once. And then the thing with Diana and my mum. So I kind of there has always been this lingering connection to Queen Elizabeth. Um, I believe the way she was portrayed as softening up some of the edges of monarchy and still uh, abiding by the traditions. The fact that she stepped into the role that wasn't expecting to step into. So the narrative has been, the narrative has helped me hold some of that mythic spirit. King Charles, like personally, I'm not really into it. I don't really, yeah, or his son who's meant to be taken over after. That's yeah, uh, I'm less keen about. I I think that monarchies are basically saying that some people are born supreme over everybody. I don't agree with ideas of supremacy, and I don't believe that anyone is born better than anyone else. You might be born with more opportunity or resources, but not necessarily better. I do understand that the monarchy performs a very key role in uniting people. I feel like people project the best of what they can be onto the monarchy, and that can guide people to be the best that they can be by having someone there. I also think that sometimes the projection gets done so much that they forget that they can be what they are projecting as well. And that is actually not someone who's better than them. That is this is them themselves. Um, yeah, um, yeah.
So there's a is what the Jungians would call a golden shadow problem. You're projecting your own higher possibilities onto someone else, and that can be self-sabotage, but it can also be a useful thing to organize people. But that changes over time as the characteristic of what would be best about people changes in new circumstances. So even though you don't have a lot of interest or confidence in William or, or if he was killed, Harry becoming a useful monarch, I'm curious what it would take. Like whoever succeeds Charles, if it was William or whoever, what would he have to do for you to be like, oh, this is functioning again. This is a useful monarch. This is allowing who the British people are now and what they need now to project and see themselves reflected in that figure. Like what would it take for William to be a good king, as far as you would be concerned?
William, don't really have much hope for. Harry, on the other hand, could be something different. Um, because Harry has had to deal with, and this is the thing about Queen Elizabeth as well, wasn't expecting to take on that role and has had to deal with, and then Harry has had to deal with a lot of backlash, yeah, towards him and towards his wife, um, and a little bit towards his child as well, actually, and his children actually. So, and that understanding of the other's experience, the actual direct relational understanding of it, and then and yeah, I feel like that, um, yeah, being able to have the capacity to hold space for the other, um sincerely, subjectively, intersubjectively, so not just them as an object but as them as something of an interior which you can kind of take on and become that interior for a little bit, and let go. If William showed the capacity to do that, it will. I feel like it would show up in other ways, which I can't quite explain because it's like such what I'm talking about, such a esoteric, subtle thing. But it shows up in people. It shows up in the way that yeah. But I feel it would be to what they would have to do to like reinstall some function of that. They would have to do a mixture of keeping certain traditions and also creating certain new traditions and updating things. And I mean, black people weren't invited to work in a royal household until very recently, or just there's just little things, not even about race, but just the ways that people are, and yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I watch a lot of British comedy game shows. I'm a big Jimmy Carr, David Mitchell, and Richard Iowati guy. And as a casual observer of these shows over years, it seems to me that the contestants are getting dumber and dumber from year to year. They seem to be increasingly unable to focus and formulate their thoughts, and they're just immersed in a really lowbrow pop culture and not very aware of historical and political and philosophical knowledge anymore. And that's a bit weird to me as a North American because I project that the British school system, as brutal as it may have been at times, was giving everyone a high class linguistic, cultural, intellectual experience that we weren't getting in North America. I wonder if there's any truth to that. But first of all, is British culture degenerating? Like, do you think the intellectual level of Britain is holding, growing, or diminishing?
Dividing.
Mm,
I don't want to say that it's getting lower. I don't want to speak badly about my country in a way, and the people I know as well. Um, I think I think it is dividing. Um, I think a lot of the shows are portraying worse and worse aspects of
mm.
us, and the what was it, reality TV trend, kind of, you know. Oh, don't get me started on all this Love Island and Towie and The Only Way of Dex and stuff. I'm not into it. And then we had our own version of Jerry Springer and that. Yeah, I don't know if it's low, but I think it's dividing. I think we have some sore problems in our culture, and um, we aren't addressing it, and people are becoming more and more distracted and tired. And yeah,
I think a lot of people have an idea about patriotism that's different than the actual experience of patriotism. And you said something there a minute ago. I don't want to speak badly about my country and the people I know. Is that a patriotic sensibility?
100%. And I thought as I was saying it, like that's why, like this is why it's a really interesting conversation to me to have, because as much as people think that I'm anti-West and anti-English and stuff like that, like I'm very much an English Westerner. um, yeah, I don't want to speak badly unduly about, I don't want to do it about anyone. I definitely don't want to do it about my country. And I definitely don't do it about the people I know. And yeah, that's a sense of loyalty, a loyalty to a location and to a space, and so that's and to a peoples, and so yeah, it's a form of patriotism. Um, yeah, I'm not loyal to a fault though. I have to say. Um,
a lot of people, when they're teenagers, when they're adolescents, go through a period of a broader cultural awakening and critique and rebellious emotions. Um, in that period of your life, how would I put this? Was there anything you reconsidered about your relationship to Britain while you were a teenager?
In terms of like
Just the
negatively.
way you were holding it. It's not really that I'm curious about. I'm really curious whether what transformations might have gone on in you. You know, from a child's view to an adolescent's view to an adult view. What did you bump into where you thought, oh, that makes me feel a little bit different about how I've been relating to my country?
Yeah, as I said, one of the first professions I wanted to do was be a police officer because I thought it meant helping people. Um, that didn't last long when police ran up in my mum's flat, apparently looking for the person who lived there before, but we're pretty sure they just wasn't sure how a black woman was affording us a flat like that. Um, Never made sense. I can actually remember, I must have been about 2 or 3, and I can remember the boots on the floor, you know, the boots passing. So that changed my idea of who my country would protect, who would it protect me. Um, yeah. And I guess I've always known about slavery and Britain's role in slavery. It's like wasn't something that wasn't talked about. Like, yeah, before, you know, before school. Um, I'd always known about racism because I always felt like I needed to know about certain things that might happen because I needed to be able to look after myself in case they did happen, um, and look after myself emotionally and mentally as well as just physically. So I guess that changed it again. But it wasn't actually until I was about moved back to London, so somewhere in my 30s, I think 29, maybe 30s, that it changed again when I found out that some of the taxes I was paying was going to service a debt that was taken out to pay reparations to slaveholders to basically ensure that I would be free and my family would be free in the past. And when I realized I pay taxes and my granddad and my mum had paid taxes, it's just like, I was just like, there's something not quite right here, especially when one of the descendants of these people have become the prime minister. And so, um, yeah. And then there's the city of London, which again, if you look into it, it just puts the whole country in a bit of a different light as into our role in the world. And yeah,
Britain is, I don't know if famous is the right word, but it's known as a hub of modern esoteric and occult thinking. Right, the new druids, the new witches, going to Stonehenge and Yeats and Crowley and Alan Moore and all this stuff. What role do you think a kind of occult sensibility plays in establishing a cultural field? Because I know probably even, going back into the high point of the empire, there were, masons and weird stuff and rituals going on. Is that a functional role in a people having an experience of themselves for there to be some kind of esoteric subculture at work, orienting the symbolism and the secret practices and all that kind of stuff?
I don't know if it's necessary. I definitely know it does happen, and it's powerful. Um, I don't know if it. I don't know if it's necessary for it to happen intentionally. Is what I mean.
Hmm.
I think it happens anyway. I think when it happens intentionally, it's interesting. You're right to point to the British Empire because apparently that was the whole idea of John Dee talking to Enochian angels, and he explained that to Queen Elizabeth I, and she and her tenuous relationship with him. Yeah, I think that from now understand my understanding of the cult, Jonathan Gruber was very kind enough to send me a book, which is edited on modern occultism and the history of it. It seems like it's got a stream that runs throughout uh, the whole of our being, in, not just Western culture, not just Northern Hemisphere, but just human culture. So yeah, I think it's important. However, I don't think it needs to be all dark and seedy. I think you can just take the essence of it as symbolic representation, of the power of symbolic representation to unite and to bring meaning, and to provide meaning, and to distill meaning. And yeah.
I'm curious how that relates to, I don't know, the British strike me as having this split over the last few centuries between, on the one hand, a really kind of cynical, industrial, reductionist, the land of Darwin and factories. But on the other hand, the land of Narnia and Middle Earth and wherever they go in Peter Pan and, this sort of exotic, imaginal world. How do you think the British spirit relates to the world of the imagination?
We cherish it very strongly. I'm thinking of Walt Whitman patrolling Barnegat, Roald Dahl, despite his unfortunate anti-Semitism. Um, like so many works that have come from Britain. And then the sense of mythos with King Arthur and the Round Tables. Um, yeah, this separation for me, it just represents what England is about. It's actually an ancient country. It's actually had peoples here for a very, very, very long time. And the one people that are here now are, as I said, a group of many different people who have come together. And yeah, yeah. As in all places Christianity touched, it built on the foundations of the spiritual foundations that are already there. Um, and yeah, that stuff never really goes away anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah, there's something I really cherish about the Celtic cross, about this thing that happens to Christianity in Britain where the circle is added. It says a lot to me, consciously and subconsciously. Um, what's your impression of Canada? How do you imagine Canada?
Cold, um, cold and big, uh, grizzly bears and mountains, and I know that's like that's not it. Oh, what are those guys called in the red outfits? The
The
policemen,
Mounties.
the Mounties, yeah. Um, kind of the goose. If I'm bringing a bit more contemporary, kind of the goose as streetwear. I've got family out there now, so I've got a bit more of a bit more of a nuanced take. But yeah, growing up, that's what that's what it was. Unfortunately, I'm not going to mention South Park, uh, but yeah, I'm being peaceful people, French, a bit French and peaceful, not American. So if you meet someone and as well, sorry, last one. If I meet someone, I always say you Canadian because that's better than being mistaken for an American. I find.
Well, let's touch on that part a little. What seems problematic about the Americans from the British point of view?
In Britain, we are quite reserved. We have the thing called stip upper lip. We like to conserve our emotions and regulate things. We've been here for a very long time. We do things on a smaller scale, but for a longer time. And when in America, it's a bit more like you're very much bigger and louder and more brash, and everything's bigger. And yeah, that's the stereotype, I guess. Yeah.
What do you admire about the Americans?
Um, a sense of opportunity that comes with the American dream. I think that's something. Yeah, and marketing. Americans have done marketing very well.
What's your impression of where the Americans are culturally and politically in this world historical moment?
I thought you might not ask and I get away with it. I would associate with hypermodernity as an oscillation between postmodern and essentially. Um, I don't have a good prognosis for America at the moment. The signs are quite bleak. Um, I read the Parable trilogy a few years back, It begins in 2025 with LA fires and a President Donna, and with the idea of making America again. In a few decades, there are these computerized trucks which are bulletproof and automated for the rich, which some communities have. Um, it very much speaks to Octavia Butler's book. Very much speaks to a political landscape which has been owned by a CEO or run by a CEO king, and the inequity has got way bigger, and the economy has taken tumbles. Um, from my understanding, there is a planned shock to American economy coming, which seemed to resemble the kind of plan that Liz Truss wanted to put into place when she was ousted from the Conservatives. Um, there's a gentleman called Chris Yarvin who seems to be close to members and has what seems to be nefarious plans from some points of view. Um, yeah, it's not looking good. And I am a bit concerned actually for my family out there in terms of the immigration. I've heard people being advised to buy birth certificates. Sorry, not buy birth certificates, to get dual citizenship. I need to buy my birth certificate, my long-term birth certificate. I heard that people need to get dual citizenship. It would be advisable in case the deportations go wrong and or run rampant, and if they believe they have nowhere to deport you to, then that could be very serious. I mean, they're talking about Guantanamo Bay like just the other day, weren't they? Um, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom, because I do see quite a lot of um, organization taking place that goes beyond, and it's what I hope to see. I expect to see the rise of mutual aid networks. I expect to see protests and writing to your congressperson. And I was hoping to see the people saying, set up cooperatives, go further than the mutual aid, set up a cooperative, um, put things into practice that go beyond what you would do now. Put something in practice that, if my prognosis is wrong and it's not going to hell, and the US is changing what we know it as, what way it has been and what we know it as, then starting up a cooperative will still be good, because you've got a business that is keeps costs low and is for the good of the members, and profits are democratized, which is the limits of democracy at the moment. Profits aren't democratized. So yeah, yeah.
Okay, you ask me some questions.
Say that again.
You ask me questions.
Okay. Can I go? Can I take a break first?
Yeah, sure, I'll pause this.
Cool.
Okay, we're back. Now you are the interviewer.
Okay, so I'm keeping it in within this context, yeah. Just checking. The context
Sure.
of
Well,
nation.
unless you're strongly motivated to go somewhere else.
I am, but let's I'll try some. What's your relationship as an American? And what
Yeah,
I mean by being of the continent of America.
it's interesting because I've always pushed back against people who've tried to establish Canadian identity by opposing it to the Americans. And in some sense, America is transcends the United States. It applies up and down the Americas. Um, I think there's as a participant in the Americas, it's a really exciting thing. It's simultaneously really ancient and in some ways dark. There's a line from William Burroughs where he says, America is not a young land, it is old. The evil was there before the Indians. There's a sense of this ancient darkness and this ancient wisdom and this extraordinary expansive possibility and this feeling of being like between Europe and Asia is a really neat place to be. And you're always negotiating those, and you feel kind of safe because you got the oceans on both sides. You feel like you've got a lot of space, you've got a lot of resources. It gives you a kind of ease that way. You can always escape. You can always escape from people. You can always escape from cities. You can always go into the wilderness in a few minutes, and it makes you feel like you have this option to opt out of civilization at every moment, and so you're always like coming and going from being a civilized person. But at the same time, you feel um, a little bit insufficient relative to Asian and European cultures. You always feel like you kind of have something to prove by trying to demonstrate that you're educated or trying to demonstrate that you're friendly or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the age of the land mixed with the sense of newness, I guess, of it being because even if you're traveling west or if you're traveling east, it was always the new land for humans.
Yeah.
Mm. Um, how do you relate to a sense of well, for you, what is patriotism for you actually?
I mean, at a very visceral level, I connect to these ideas that there's a sort of subtle blood that courses through the people, and yet I'm extremely wary of those concepts because they're mostly mobilized as part of fascist regression. And yet I feel like people can't get together without some version of that. You know, I actually talked about it. I did an interview with a guy about the Canadian spirit, and that sort of triggered this series. And one of the things I ended up saying, I ended up talking about this experience I had. I came out of this sushi bar one day, and the gay pride parade had just come by, and there was like glitter and balloons on the street. And I'd never cared about the gay pride parade, but I picked up a balloon and I thought, oh, these guys are doing good work. Like they're out they're putting their bodies on the line for something that's very human and kind of futuristic and energetic. And I thought, oh, I have gay pride. And I think that patriotism ought to be, for me, it's like the nexus where different kinds of pride can come together and where people can it, how do I put this? I came out of a movie theater a couple of months ago, and there was this old guy who we've got nothing in common except that we're citizens of Canada. And he just asked me about the movie, and I told him a meaningless remark, and we kind of nodded at each other, and he went on his way. But there was a good feeling exchanged between us, something edifying that made me healthier and happier and more solid. And that sense that you can build something together where just by being a part of it, everybody's sacredness is raised, where you just nod to each other on the street because you're part of the same thing. And I don't see how we can implement changes to solve our collective problems if we don't have that shared mutual enjoyment that comes with an unforced patriotism. But I will say that I find that the people who speak the most about it have the least of it. They're expressing a starvation for patriotism rather than a patriotism.
So, for you, patriotism isn't a necessary negative thing, which I think is good. And you also acknowledge that it's got some, it can be used in fascistic ways, however you say that. And so I guess my question is, do you think patriotism might have any of the antidotes to that tendency to use it in a fascistic way? And if not, where might we find some of those antidotes?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky. Part of me wants to answer this from like a health, unhealth perspective, where like healthy patriotism has remedies for its own problems, and unhealthy patriotism is usually, like I said, expressing a failure of patriotism. People who are waving the flags are saying, we don't trust patriotism. They're not eased enough. But another part of me wants to look at it as a developmental stack, right?
Mm,
And so there's this patriotism and there's this patriotism and there's this patriotism. And the people that want to roll back to this one,
mm,
that's a real patriotism, but it's unpatriotic relative to this level. So what I think patriotism needs a developmental or a vertical trajectory and that's the fascistic use in my mind is an attempt to sort of deconstruct this level of achieved value and roll back to a simpler version. But that's intensely problematic and usually destructive for everyone. So I think we'd need to anchor patriotism in a kind of futurism and in a kind of developmentalism in order to keep it from self-destructing.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I can see how on this level this level of patriotism might be intersubjective. For example, it might take in lots of different senses of patriotism and stick it all together. Whereas this sense of patriotism might be more subjective in that it's just one sense of patriotism that everyone must follow. So I can see that. What I'm wondering about is this it's I might be wrong. It sounds like you're talking about a lack, like a sort of uh, a lack of felt sense of patriotism becoming a projected sense of patriotism, which also is tied up in that lack. And um, yeah, uh, perhaps.
Yeah, I think people who experience the simultaneity of the lack and the ideal become dangerous. Um, they know its importance and they don't know how to get it. And so what they end up doing is just saying they have it and telling other people to just say they have it. And in all of that, no one's paying attention to how you actually develop it for living beings.
Sorry, sounds a bit like being integral in a way. Uh,
Yeah,
Second
I
tier.
mean, I think there's integral patriotism in both senses. Like I think there's an integral version of national patriotism, but I think there also needs to be a patriotism for integral. I mean, uh, I don't necessarily promote myself as this, but obviously I've devoted my life to these things. So I'm acting as though I really care about and feel part of a certain kind of community and that I have a lot of trust in, a lot of pride in. And I think if there's any solutions, it comes from these sorts of people. So that, yeah, I have a lot of integral patriotism in both senses.
That brings me on to the other question, which I was thinking of, which might not be within this context, but I guess it can be. Now I can see how it's in both contexts. Um, I think it was James Baldwin who said, "I love America so much that I have to say the problems I see in America so that I can love America more once it gets." No, I'm paraphrasing, but um, and then there's the phenomenon of once you come across integral theory, once you are British, there is no undoing that sense of Britishness. There is no taking the concepts of the four quadrants out of my head now. They're in there, you know. There is no post integral, there's no post British, there's no post Canadian for us. There's no, as I was saying, there's no post identity. It's imminent. Um, but at the same, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. How can I critique? So how can I critique integral as a patriot? How can
Mm.
and still be heard by other patriots who will see me as an attack on their source of patriotism?
Hmm. Great question. And I think part of it is just that um, it's okay when people respond as if they've been attacked, right? That might be just the opening of the negotiation. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Energy's being exchanged. But I will say that so part of my strategy with kids, he points upstairs to where the kids are, um, is I have a very small number of principles for dealing with these children. And one of them is you always show them that you're happy to see them, even if you're going to say something that's problematic about their behavior. So, like, the first thing you do is, I'm happy with this, I'm happy with you. And so, if you start with very clear sort of virtue expressions, you're like, hey, I'm into this, we're into this, I love you guys, this is great. On the basis of that, I would like to offer this critique. Rather than just launching into the critique, I think you get different results over time.
Thank you. You've helped me clarify why some not even just in the music scene. Sometimes people want things, and they want to perform and you're doing stuff and why. Yeah, why it's always worked well to um be like, thanks. I appreciate you coming. You just let us do this kind of thing. Yeah. So what do you think about what's going on in America? Where do you think America is heading over the next 2 years?
I mean, I think they have a lot of resilient civic structures. I think they will survive the second Trump administration. But in general, I think America has been on a course of decline for some time. Um, that they're definitely handing more and more control to oligarchs. That's been happening for decades. I largely blame the Democrats and the center left for what looks like the populist right. I think the populist right is an expression of the failure of the center left. There are signs that are proto-fascist, as far as I'm concerned, in insofar as a lot of things I see the people around Trump doing are things that look to me like they're designed to deconstruct America. I think that's kind of, to me, that's what fascism is in a way. Like I know it's important to think the relationship of the Nazi to the Jew, and that the particular is the site of the universal, but I also think it's important to imagine that the Nazis' real enemy is the German. They were against the German Jew, right? And everything they did wrecked Germany. And I think that the moves the Trump administration is doing are largely moves that wreck the infrastructure of how America can continue to thrive. And I think it puts them further behind, and they're already behind relative to China and some of the other countries that have a plan for the future. So I'm pessimistic in that sense. And yet, uh, most of the people who seem to understand what's going on in the world today are in America. Most of the people in these networks who I run into, who understand the critique of nations, who understand where technology can go next, who understand the need for a new kind of sacredness. America is full of these people. Maybe it's got more of these people than any other place in the world. So I'm really excited by the American subcultures, even though I'm pessimistic about the American infrastructure. And I'm flying down to see my mother in the Caribbean in a couple of weeks. I'm a little worried. I have to pass through the United States. I don't know that it's going to be smooth and safe to pass through that country. So there's an emotional anxiety there as well.
Very astute. I'm wondering if you can give me any thoughts on like the prognosis for Britain.
I mean, I don't know. It's interesting to think about how those boundaries are drawn in Britain. I know Canada's got Quebec, and there's always the question of Quebec separatism, which, it doesn't go anywhere. It just renegotiates what the definitions mean. But when I look at Scotland and Ireland and Wales and places like that, who might have different relationships to the economy or to the European Union, um, I think maybe it might be useful for them to tilt a little bit away, and a lot of renegotiation would have to go on. I know, like a lot of the British nuclear fleet is in Scotland, and all these kind of renegotiations would have to go on. But that might be what's necessary. I think. Um, I think Britain has to reestablish deep relationships with Europe somehow, but I think it could also potentially be the critical voice against the sort of Belgian banker version of the European Union. So I think it could be. I would like to see Britain become like a really necessary piece of the European identity. A deeper relationship, but also a provocative relationship from within that sphere. I don't know what's going to happen with the monarchy. I think the post King Charles move either decides whether the monarchy will be finished or whether it can regenerate somehow. I think Britain it's really uniquely. We talked earlier about the kind of British voice, And that's something that can be taught and trained, regardless of where you come from or how you look. And I think Britain has something to show the rest of the world in terms of how anybody can join a particular cultural identity, right? I think it's really unique in that fashion. There's this old story about how, like, Britain just conquers its invaders. Like, no matter who invades Britain, eventually they become British. That's a beautiful story, right? That tells us something about how we can make a trans-ethnic, trans-cultural, international, but still particular cultural zone. And I think that's something everybody needs to learn. So I hope it goes that way, but I'm not that confident. I think there's structural reasons why so many ridiculous conservatives were elected, and those same structural reasons ensure that the Labor government is not going to be very radical or progressive. So I think you're caught in basically the same trap the Americans are caught in, is that the back and forth, the oscillation is holding you in a position that ultimately stagnates unless you can break that somehow.
How do you see the idea of the nation state uh, developing over time? And I guess I guess there are three trajectories we've kind of talked about. There's the trajectory of it kind of getting worse, what we kind of fear is going to happen, and then there's what we hope is going to happen, and then there's like kind of a in between. But yeah, so you might want to answer in the one or two or the three,
Mm.
or just one. But how do you think the nation state is going to change over
I think
time?
it continues to have a really big role. I think, yes, like I'm all in on global digital civilization and its decentralizing, but that's not a process that's going to happen overnight. It's not a process that will succeed in the next 10 years. That the nation states will continue to be the organizers of populations and military and money to a large degree for the foreseeable future. So we have no choice but to figure out how they mediate between the people and the planet, and that can be done in a better way or a worse way. And to some degree, I think that's about the balance between nation and state, right? There's like a state is a kind of bureaucratic, military, geographic entity, and a nation is kind of like a people. And you have to get that balance right. So you could argue that the United States, for example, is a state where two different nations are continually warring for control. And then you could argue that Scotland is a nation that doesn't have a state. So I think if you get that balance right between a, not a homogenous identity, but an identity that feels homogenous enough to permit its diversity to unfold, and a sense of formal identity and sovereignty as a decision-making entity, then the nation state can actually start to play that role as a mediator between the people and the emerging planetary civilization. But if those balances are off, it can't play that role, and it ends up just getting parasitized by international forces of various kinds.
How can we break this link between? I don't know, maybe you've answered already, but how can we break this link between patriotism and fascism? Patriotism seems to be really important. I can agree with you. It's in the framework of binding people together in a cohesive way. However, it is really susceptible to being weaponized towards fascism and then against the the cohesion of the people in say a sustainable way. So yeah.
Well, I come back to remember I asked you the three multiple choice question. I think those are kind of the factors. I think there has to be a general public acknowledgement of the things that have gone wrong in the history of the nation, but that has to be enveloped in a positive feeling. You say, like, okay, given that we're great, we are great enough to acknowledge we fucked this up, and by acknowledging that, we're going to be even greater, and something like that. There have to be real rules that block the people who are paying themselves based on destroying the nation state. And there have to be civic institutions that cultivate a multi-level, full-spectrum civic identity of some kind. And that's really the one we could actually implement. The other two are much harder, but we can start producing people that have a healthy, expansive, sort of all chakra version of national identity of some kind. And I think that mitigates against fascist collapse because I think fascism is dependent upon rigidity and oversimplification. And it wants to go back to a simpler version. And that it comes out of my version of fascism, if I extract it out of the World War II scenario and generalize it in a developmental context, I see populations filling up with nihilistic tendencies, right? Where they eat what doesn't nourish them and they think what they can't really think and they have a government that's anti-government. They have all of these self-nullifying tendencies. And if you have too many of those, they eventually build up into a mobilization that starts to take your country apart. And that's when it's fascist, when it starts to mobilize. But the real thing is to prevent those nihilistic tendencies from accumulating in the first place and replace them with regenerative cultural tendencies. I think that's where you solve that problem.
Very interesting. Reminds I've been questioning the relevance and the role of Black Metamodernism in terms of what's going on now and the worst of what could happen. And one of the areas in it was about the aspect of culture and yeah, so it's very interesting to hear you say that. Um, it's like my mischievous face. In what ways has our liminal webs failed to meet the task, would you say? And in what ways have these failures not really been failures, but just been part of the course, I guess?
Um, Here, our weaknesses are insularity in the sub tribes, right? That we don't have enough people who move between the different sections and also can enjoy it and adapt to all of those different moods. I think we're too intellectual and not practical enough. If we were to do, there's not enough of us doing actual physical projects or starting businesses together or doing things with real stakes that require the development of real teamwork. And so as a result, we don't deepen together. Um, and I think the other aspect of it is similar that our sense of bringing worldviews and values together remains too intellectual and not visceral enough. So I, wrote this book on Gurdjieff, and one of the reasons I like Gurdjieff is inner struggle and friction is really highlighted because there's a difference between saying, oh, I can synthesize these two alternative values and actually going, I've lived through the fire of those two values trying to do different things in my life, and they're both important, and it just tears you apart. But I've learned to exist in the tearing. I think that's a strength we need to cultivate in each other.
So what can Gurdjieff offer us now in these trying times?
I think he can offer us first of all, like I was just saying, a sense that meta philosophies have to be um, complemented by rigorous inner practice, which involves intentional suffering and intentional friction as a way of integrating these different systems in ourselves. I think he offers us mm, he incites imaginal world building in a really personal way. Like if one reads Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, it's a really unique, idiosyncratic cosmology, multidimensional, tells a story about how inner practice has to serve a function in the biosphere and in the cosmos. It's not just for you. And I think that's really important. How do we ecologize the context of our inner practice, but also how do we develop our own really unique, really personal cosmologies and not just cluster around a few sciency cosmologies that a few big thinkers have offered us. And then the other thing he offers us is a model for how our Adepts, our spiritual leaders, our philosophers need to be really humorous and really human and really surrealist and not sort of just brittle and dogmatic and aspirational. He's a very earthy, very human kind of figure compared to a lot of other spiritual leaders and sages. And I think we need that to be full spectrum, so to speak.
I guess that includes magic as well.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting overlap between Gurdjieff and the occult. Uh, I grew up reading a lot of Colin Wilson, the British author who wrote about the occult and studied Gurdjieff as mages. And I think there's a role for the occult in all of this that has not been fully inspected yet. I'm working on this thing called Zajic, where there's a new discourse around that. But I think if we just try to bring together new cognitive science and integrative theory and Christian mysticism and Buddhism, there's a lot of stuff that's going to get left out, which is in the richness and the transduality and in the darkness and in the agency and in the daring, all these sort of really rich, flavorful elements of occult theory that don't get highlighted in those mainstream developmental projects. So I think the magic has to be brought in, both for its own sake and to enrich the emergence of new wisdom movements.
um, Completely off topic, but you said there were children upstairs earlier, by which I'm guessing you mean you have a family. I'm wondering, is that the case? And if so, how often do you talk about these ideas with your family? I know sometimes I tie my partner out by talking about metamodernism and all this stuff. So yeah, um,
Uh, I've got I've got a bunch of godchildren, and we've also got three kids that are my partners from her previous relationship, and we have them every other week. So when they're here, um, I don't. I mean, with her, there's a lot of back and forth theory discussion, and she's become a even though she had all the instincts for this, intellectually become a much more able interlocutor over the years. With the kids, it's tactical. I mean, the first thing is, like I said, I'll always be happy to see them. What I mostly want to do is nuance what they're doing. I want to make whatever they're experiencing slightly more complex. I don't need to tell them much about the theory, but I do want to hear about their dreams, about their strange experiences, about their take on things. And I never tell them they have the wrong take, even if it sounds wrong to me. I want to take them to the next level of complexification about it. But also, now that they're a little bit older, I will drop in little mimetic chunks. And I do it quickly. I do it like, we're watching a show. I'll just pause it and I'll tell them something, but I don't want it to take more than 20 seconds. I don't want to lecture them to the point where they have to respond to me like I'm lecturing. I just want to put in a little piece so they have that to use in their own sense making going forward.
have you ever done any youth work?
I don't think so. I mean, I did. For a couple of years when I lived on the West Coast, I did this thing where I was an auxiliary science teacher who would move around between different schools. So I got to deal with young kids of various kinds and also see the different schooling systems from the inside. That was fun. But that was probably the closest thing to youth work.
Yeah, because what you were saying sounds like very good advice that a youth worker would give to another youth worker about how to engage with young people in terms of that's something I was trained to get stuff out of them, but not put judgments on it and let them to ask them questions to get them to think about what they're saying. Um, yeah, that's quite interesting. Um, uh, I might be run out. Mm,
Okay.
yeah, my mind's going blank.
Well, that's probably a good place to end. I'm going to jump
Maybe I
onto
think I'm
another
getting
call in
hungry.
10 minutes anyway.
Pardon? Say that again.
I've got a meeting in 10 minutes, so we're probably coming to the end of this. I'm
Okay.
happy to have been a guest on your show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's been a pleasure having you today, Layman, and I hope to get you back to the integral stage at some point in the future, we can have a deepen this conversation. You do this much better than I do.